unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, where every bean tells a story of adventure. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity, where we're continuing to travel around the world talking to creative practitioners everywhere who are turning ideas into impact. It's one thing to think creatively, but it's another to apply that innovation and make an impact on this world. And today I'm so happy to be talking about the intersection of storytelling, brand strategy, but also soul and a brand universe that is more than just a business idea. My guest is Luna Battalia. Luna, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. I'm so happy to be here.
Luna, when you founded Caru Creative, you were really looking for this mission-driven branding, but you're also working with people who are not only thinking about their business, but thinking about their soul's work. I can't wait to explore that with you a little bit more.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
And let's start with you, and you describe yourself not only as a brand strategist, but artist, poet, devotee of this life mystery. You know, maybe you could walk us through your own creative journey and how you came to this intersection of leadership, branding, and soul-centered business.
Yeah, I'm an only child. So us only children, anyone who's listening knows that you got to keep yourself occupied. You have to learn how to keep yourself occupied from a young age and self-entertain in a way. And art and creativity has always been something that I've gravitated towards as a child my whole life. My grandma has this funny story about this coffee table where I would doodle and doodle for hours. And I would take, as a 10, 11-year-old, I'd go to the local community college and take continuing ed courses as a 10-year-old to learn watercolor painting and photography and just do classes. And it was great because it was like summer camp on the weekends. My mom got to send me to college.
Yes.
And so I got to always kind of be making. I'm a maker. I love to make things. And so as I got older, I was in fashion, I was in marketing, I was in styling, I've done things in magazines and so editorial. And so I just love creating worlds and stories and visual ways of doing that. And then as I got out of the kind of corporate design world into my own work, it was much more spiritual, soul-centered, but the people that kept coming to me were these really visionary women who had big projects and big businesses and big things that they were carrying, and they were doing inner work in order to be able to carry the bigness of their work that they were being asked to in the world. And so I didn't really make a conscious decision around it. It kind of just was what was coming to me, and I really trusted that and just said yes. And then over time, my brand kind of developed more to have the clarity of that messaging and the visual story that represents that and speaking more to that audience and not just having those people come to me by happenstance, but much more intentionally.
Yes, and now attracted, you've put that out there. And was there a time when you said, look, there's a lot of branding frameworks out there. I've created a few myself, but books and books on branding. But you realized in working with the women you're describing that had maybe a deeper calling that these traditional frameworks, weren't going to fulfill the need.
Yeah, they do to a degree. And not only was I crafting these on my own just by over the 15 years that I was doing it, and then realized, there's actually a whole method here that I had been repeating because I've troubleshot that it works. I didn't do that intentionally. It just kind of after the fact. But the main thing that is the big differentiating factor is this approach that I have called Animist Branding. And Animist Branding is really about animism and everything having a soul and everything being alive, and especially the things that we create. Just like children, we create them, we birth them, we bring them into the world, but they're not us. We can't identify as them, but we can relate with them and to them. And when we get curious in that relationship and create space for listening and intimacy, then there's a lot that can be revealed as to what that creation wants to become. Whether it's a child who has their own career path or interests in tennis or whatever, or a book that might have a whole life of its own that is bigger than what you had intended for it. And I think of businesses as the same way. Anything that we create really is something that we're bringing into the world, and it has a life beyond us.
Yes. Even these words that you're using, animist, brand universes, brand ecosystems, there is a living, breathing, inhale, exhale, growth component to it. What do you think that means in practice? I mean, great theory. How does that maybe exhibit itself in brand practice?
Well, there's two ways. There's one from the business owner, and then there's the view in practicality from the audience and from the consumer. So from the owner, it's really about having, as I mentioned, having a relationship with the brand so that we're not just people are on Instagram and they're getting inundated with all these strategies. Do this, this is what works. Look how much this made. This makes so much money. If you just do this, this will grow your whatever. And it's all these promises from people who've never even talked to you, looked at your business, have no idea what you're actually doing. And there's so many of those things that if you don't have this really strong, centered relationship with your own creation, your own business, it's very easy to kind of be looking externally and swayed for these answers. So the approach is not to not use strategies from other people or not to hire help at all, but to understand what is actually needed from a place of intimacy with your own business, not reaching out to try to piecemeal little bits and marketing practices, but really have it internally shaped by what your particular brand needs. And I find that when we do that, it impacts the audience's experience. So of course, we can build a website that has all the information and looks pretty. But if we build a brand world or universe, it can literally be like a portal, like a VR headset that you put on and you kind of get transported to another world. And you're like, whoa. And you've done that when you're like looking for restaurants on your phone in a new town and you go to the website and you're just like, I want to eat here. I'm inspired. There's something that's like, I looked at this other one and the menu looks good, but like the website doesn't. They're not transporting me to a world where I'm like, wow, if I go into this restaurant, I'm going to have a particular experience that I'm already having just by being on the website. I can only imagine in real life how that's going to feel. And we want to give that to our audience. Specifically, I work with a lot of service-based businesses, so personal brand service-based businesses. And so they're inviting people to not just purchase a service, but have an experience with them where they're delivering a service and they're working with them. And so we want to set the tone for what that experience is going to be like at every touch point online so that they're having this like emotionally evocative, alive, inspired experience that they can feel. They might not be able to name it, but they can feel it, and it moves them into the next step and the next step and the next step. And that feeling kind of draws them in towards action and buying or purchasing or working with them. So that's really the two ways that it's working.
Yes. And you're really contrasting some of the transactional language. You mentioned the Instagram, attraction, but, clicks, views, funnels, all these things that we think of today's marketing tools. But you're really contrasting this with an experience, touch points and emotion. Even the word touch points is different than, clicks and views.
And we track all that stuff too. Like I track all of that for my business and clients' businesses, and stats are great. And we have higher conversion rates and open rates than most people. And I think it's than industry standards, I would say.
Sure.
Because we're building a much more intimate brand experience. And in a world that's so saturated with AI and marketing and just this lack of human connection, I think that my clients are trying to attract those types of people who want that. And so they have to obviously build it. We can't just talk about it. There has to be an experiential exchange there where we have the same values. So it's not for everyone who's just trying to make money and isn't necessarily really value-driven, customer-driven, heart-centered. That's okay.
And you yourself, as an entrepreneur? I mean, you're working with these founders, you're working with entrepreneurs who have big visions. But I also think of maybe listeners who, like you, are multi-passionate, titles, multi-interests. We all have so many things going on. It's like, I like a little bit of this, and I'm also dabbling in that, and I'm an investor in this venture, or, what have you. What does it really take in your mind to be that kind of an entrepreneur soulfully, not just, I want the business for the return or the investment?
Well, I loved what you were talking about with the multi-passionate, because I know your podcast is so much more about creatives and creativity. And anyone who's a creative, in my experience, at some point, everyone that I know that's an artist feels forced, even if it's for a temporary amount of time, to pick a medium
Mhm.
and to really go in on it wholeheartedly for a period of time to get better at it, to see what the work evolves into. And I think the same is true with business and people who, I mean, my audience, they're not just visionaries, they're really executing big global projects and, things that have a lot of pieces to their brand world. And and in order to execute that, I think the main thing is capacity. So it's like when I'm giving all these kid analogies, I don't even have children, but when you have one kid and then you are pregnant and you have another kid, your capacity has to grow to give them equal amounts of attention. And you need a certain amount of time with each creation, each child in this example, to give it what it deserves to allow it to thrive and grow. And so I think of projects in business or creative endeavors in a similar way, where I have a lot of ideas, but sometimes I have to kind of pin them for later, or really get structured in my time to make, if it's really important, I need to, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to give this 6 hours a week, 3-hour blocks twice a week in order to just start some momentum on this without necessarily needing it to be anything. And then when I want it to be something and I'm ready to really take action in a big way, it often requires me giving less attention and energy to other things to allow them to thrive. And I think that's part of the nature of building businesses and brand worlds, is like, you have to give it your full attention so it can really have legs, have a solid foundation, and thrive, and give it space and time to develop before the next thing and the next thing and the next thing comes in. And I find when people are much more of that visionary quality without the execution, that it's a lot of ideas, but things aren't happening. And so you either have to outsource that, or you have to grow capacity, or you have to have the resources to be able to have other people growing these things for you, which not everybody has or can do. And my sense is when you do that well with one thing and you give it your all, then you have the resources to do the next thing well.
The next thing.
And yeah, it's like real estate, growing a real estate portfolio. It's very similar in a way.
So interesting. And sometimes I'm wondering about these big visions. It's like we want to look confident. We want to look like we're winning, achieving these big, lofty goals. But there's always that, well, and these days we call it authenticity, we call it honesty, but there's behind the scenes, behind the polished website, behind everything that's looking great. There's still the struggles. This is where the reality comes in sometimes. How do you help us balance that?
Yeah, I think that when we're bringing any creative project into the world, we're shaping it, we're allowing it to grow, but it's also inviting us to grow. And there's a reciprocal service there. And so I think that a book, a business, a being, anything that we're bringing into this world, it's going to require us to grow and expand in order to meet it. And so I think that a huge part of the work is really the inner capacity to hold these big visions. And big is relative, right? Like, it's not a
Sure.
comparative thing to somebody else's business. It's like, for you, if it's big, it's big. If it's small, it's whatever it is in your world. Who cares what anybody else thinks? But for you, when that thing feels really big and it's stretching you. And there's people who shy away from that stretch in life, and those are not my people. God bless them on their path. But my people are the people who are really excited and inspired and motivated to become bigger and better versions of themselves in order to have more responsibility. And I really believe that with responsibility comes freedom. And so there's these maturations, there's these thresholds of in life that stretch us, whether that's a parent dying or a sickness or building a business or having a child. Like, these kinds of things are going to stretch us, and we have to be able to see the worthwhileness and then do the inner work in order to be able to hold the thing. And the inner work is sometimes asking for help and spending more money and getting support and being able to delegate. And sometimes it's learning a new skill yourself and diving in and becoming masterful at something. I learned goldsmithing in my late 30s because it's just skills. And so I think that there's a willingness to stretch and a willingness to see oneself. And for me, that always happens by taking on more responsibility.
So good. And I wanted to circle back to this idea of storytelling. Certainly there's a psychological component to the story to connect, with a customer or an audience. But I was also reading that you try to ask better questions, better questions of the clients for sure, better questions of maybe the customers and market research. But what kind of questions do you feel like help unlock some of these shifts for the leaders that you're working with?
For storytelling, it's interesting. I love this question because it's actually something I'm like, I really do need to sit with these in a tangible way. I have all these like storytelling freebies and all these like little questions that I ask, but it's a bigger picture. It's also a gift that I have, right? Like, I'm able to kind of listen to someone and hear what's underneath and draw out the pieces. And I'll come back to this in one second, but I've been blessed with a lot of travel in my life, and traveling single woman, sometimes by myself. And you talk to strangers in all these places and you listen to stories. And I've met literal storytellers from West Africa who, as a child, were selected in their tribe to be the storyteller and grew up kind of apprenticing with the elder storytellers. And there's a mastery to that. There's a way of captivating people and bringing them into a world through a story that the best directors do in movies. And so for me, a big part of that questioning is understanding the difference of how you as the brand kind of knows what your audience needs, and then what the audience themselves think that they need. And those are often different.
Sure.
They could be they should be the same, one would think, but they're often very different. What someone believes that they need and what you know that they need in order to get the job done, finish a task, experience different results, etc., they're often different things. And the bridge of storytelling is a way of helping to shift that perspective without shaming. A lot of people will take that approach, but that's not my approach. And I think it's like a good TED Talk. A good TED Talk has 20 minutes, and they come in and they say, the majority of people, with some of you here, think this about X. And the truth is, this is the truth. And then they spend that 20 minutes bridging that gap from this perception to this new perception. And so I think identifying what those two perceptions are, and then filling the middle with personal, anecdotal, historical, client-based stories that show and give you lived examples of that bridge, actually, of this new perspective being the more truer, better, more feel good approach, is really what storytelling is trying to do. And I'm not really trying to convince you of anything. I'm just so wholeheartedly committed to this perspective that my trust in it is what convinces you. And when I'm trying to convince you, there's almost a repelling thing. But when I'm just really like, this perspective is the way, and I'm so convicted, I'm so confident in this approach, you kind of are like, tell me more. There's a leaning in, there's a curiosity.
I love that. And I think about, the soul of our brands, aligning the inner clarity that, a person has with their outer work, that when those are reflective of each other. And I think about some of the conscious business practitioners, and maybe you have dealt with people like this that, I really feel very confident in my story and my soul, of my brand, but I'm uncomfortable with marketing. I'm uncomfortable with this advertising, public relations, getting out there, putting my voice, putting my picture. How do we help these big idea people with the way they show up in the world, with the way they can really communicate and exhibit their gifts?
I love this question. I find that that previous kind of brand as entity animist branding approach really solves this problem. And in a as nice as I can way, I will say to that person, you're making it about you. You're making it about you. And this thing that you're saying yes to is about being in service to the mission, being in service to this work getting out in the world. And you're not in service, you're in personal, how are people going to see me? How are people going to think of it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about your commitment and devotion and service to this work that you believe in getting out into the world. And when you have, especially for personal brands, which is primarily what I work with, that is such a big thing because their name, their face, their identity to some capacity is related to this business entity, and yet it is separate. It is something that you've created. It is something that literally has its own business entity, different, you have an EIN versus a social security.
Sure.
And you can relate to it and with it instead of identifying as your brand and start relating to it and not. I find that when that comes up, I could, in the past, many, many years ago when my coaching practice was much more depth psychology, life coaching, we would do all this inner work and like, oh, what is the wound around being seen? And like, that's great. You can do that with your therapist. That's no longer my approach. My approach is really, what is your mission? Why are you doing this? What inspired you to say yes to bringing this business into the world in the first place? And help them come back there with forward momentum back towards the vision, back towards action, and like looking at the pattern. And so kind of over time with clients, training them that when that pattern comes up to internally start to doubt or have things that kind of take you off that path of momentum, is to come back to the mission, to the relationship, to the service, to the element of why you care about this contribution being alive and well in the world. And to kind of move forward and to not so much go back into the past and dig up wounds that can really create a loop for people for a very, very long time to heal, which I'm not opposed to. It's just not my approach anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, Luna, what a terrific conversation. I want to close with a kind of a provocative question in a moment, but maybe we just take a moment to let people know where to find you and learn more about this work that you're doing.
Yeah, I hang out in two places. I'm on Instagram at Luna Battalia, and lunaloveleadership.com is my website, and Caru is in its own brand, rebrand, thing. And so you can find everything at lunaloveleadership.com until that's alive.
Good deal. I love that you're even saying it's in a something.
Yeah, something.
Every listener on this podcast is something.
Something.
Rebranding. I'm revising. I'm re-editing. You got to do one more thing. One more thing.
Yeah. Again, I think means to do it again.
Yes. And so maybe that's where I will take off. I will jump from that question. And that is, somebody's listening right now who is either moving from that elementary school stage you were talking about to say, I really want to bring my gift to the world. But somebody out there is looking to expand to the next level. Is there a small but maybe meaningful step they could take this week? They're going to turn the podcast off. They're going to reflect on what you said. And it's like, where do I start? Yes, I want to get it out there. I want to build a legacy, bring a big idea to the world. but it maybe seems too big. So where could I begin?
There's a few places. One, I would, this sounds really cheesy. Not everyone's going to vibe with this, but like put a date on the calendar the way that you would take somebody else out on a date, and get a notebook and really just set some intentional time, kind of like Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art, where he talks about the quality of resistance in the muse, and like forcing yourself to create containers where this is what you're doing. Even if no words come on the page, you sit there for this amount of time and you just kind of show up, and it will come out the more you give it space. So it's kind of, I have that similar approach. Give it a date, get a notebook, listen to it, get an audio recorder if you don't like writing, go on a walk, whatever the thing is that is authentic to you, and just ask questions, almost like a gestalt, like asking and answering the same questions yourself, but you kind of become in two different beings as you do that. And there's the employer and the employee, there's the business and the creation, there's the creator, whatever it is, but the role that you need to step into. Ask questions and then just listen, pause, wait for the answer. The other thing that I would say that's a bit more tactical, because I like to balance a little bit of the psychological, some would call it woo, with some practical, is writing out goals from 3 places. This is what I do in our business strategy sessions with clients, is we look at goals from income, impact, and legacy. And we're making sure that whatever we're doing is taking a step for all of those goals to be achieved. If one step is not contributing to the whole of all of those things, and we're just thinking short term, but we have this big vision and this big legacy, and we're like, oh, but I need XYZ now, and we're not thinking about the bigger picture, we'll often stay in a loop where we actually never get to the bigger picture because we're always focused on these like small to-dos. So I like to list out those goals in 3 categories: income, impact, and legacy, and really make sure that your business strategy, for whatever it is, give yourself more time if it feels big and daunting, and be in relationship with those steps along the way.
All good advice. Luna Battalia has been my guest. Luna, what a great conversation. I appreciated certainly we get into buyers and psychology and branding and strategy, but I love this artistry, purpose-driven leadership conversation as well.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was such a pleasure to be here.
Yes. And hey, compliments, by the way. We were talking about your website. Definitely, listeners, lunaloveLeadership.com. But it's a amalgamation of vision boarding, loud voice, concepts, downloads. I mean, it's all of that. It's not one of these websites where you go, oh, here's 3 tabs over and out. Here's the about me. Here's the contact me. This is a loud website, and you could tell it's your voice. So compliments on really bringing all that together.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So my guest has been Luna Battalia, leadership mentor, business strategist, founder of Caru Creative. We've talked about Animist Branding. We've talked about all this, and it's really been both practical and inspiring. So listeners, come back again next time as we continue these round the world journeys. We've been just in the last few episodes from Australia to Austin and all points in between to talk to creative practitioners, how we get inspired, how we organize these ideas, and ultimately how we gain the confidence and the connections to launch our work out into the world. And that's what it's all about. So until next time, I'm Mark Stinson, and we'll keep unlocking your world of creativity.